Hello and welcome to the Creators Guild podcast. I'm Chris Howell, and with me,
Jared Lovelady.
and we're here today to talk about all things creative, as per usual. And also, as per usual, we're going to start off with another chapter of A Flight from Shadows. We are on chapter 20 today. Crazy that we're still going. We're going. We've read 19 chapters so far. Hopefully, you're enjoying them. And as always, if you are enjoying our book and you haven't bought it, even if you're not enjoying our book, because you're like, these guys suck at reading this, I should just go buy it and read it. Follow that instinct. Go buy it and read it. Okay. Chapter 20 A New Confidant. Cycle of Year Aolith, Year 12182. I have watched kingdoms rise and fall. I have seen the destruction of continents. All things pass away. The ties that bind us together are the only things that truly stand the test of time. The only known complete scroll from the time of the cataclysm. Author unknown. Tawara entered her study with a sense of renewed life. She could still see a slight haunted look about her reflections, but she felt that much of her prior exuberance had returned. A dark cloud had settled on her after visiting the jail. As much as she had wanted to see the sick little man put to the question, she had avoided even asking about him since the encounter. As Tawara took her seat and straightened the books on her study desk, her new tutor smiled. Athandra stood beside an antique tiger maple writing desk. The dark lines in the wood grain revealed the source of its name. She cradled a thick leather-bound book in one hand, turning the pages with the other as she read aloud. Citations on Elven Social Constructs by Jorgen Etham chronicled the social structure of elven races. Tawara sat at her desk and half listened to Athandra's oration, her attention wandering. She wished she could sneak away to the countryside with Devant. Rain had kept Athandra and her from their morning ride. She imagined herself riding in the fields that bordered the small stream marking the southern edge of the estate. A crowned princess, when acting under the direction of the High Court, is given leeway to interpret directives as circumstances require. Tawara, under what circumstances is a crowned princess allowed to circumvent the High Court's directives and act according to her own authority? Tawara, blankly staring at her copy of the book, gave no reply. Tawara, get your head back in the room and out of the mist, girl, Athandra chastised. This is important, not to mention something you should have known ages ago. Just because you can't go riding this morning doesn't mean you can spend our lesson time daydreaming about it. What? How did you... What I daydream about is none of your business, Tawara retorted with a haughty air in her tone. A crowned princess is allowed to circumvent directives from the High Court in times of invasion and when it is a matter of impending life or death. Very good, Athandra said. Listening while thinking on other matters is a rare skill that can be honed to great use if you are disciplined enough. Or if said princess has the authority of the queen, such as when she has been appointed as the queen's acolyte. Tawara added to herself as she rested her chin on her hand and watched the rain further distort the landscape through the poured glass window. Acolyte? Athandra asked, pulling Tawara's attention fully into the room. She had not realized she had spoken the thought aloud. Athandra closed her book and sat out on the edge of the writing desk before shifting forward, her gaze becoming intense. Tawara, you have mentioned this many times, and I have not asked, but I think we should address this idea you have directly. It is more than a simple idea, Tawara retorted. I will be appointed acolyte. Why must everyone question this? Her father had plainly expressed his doubts on multiple occasions. Tessera was worse, with her passive way of asking questions like, the people of Kuvia are very demanding. Are you sure you can handle the pressure of being accolade? Or, princesses come and go, but it has been generations since one has been successful in becoming accolade. Are you sure you are the exception? Even Paris, her bloody chambermaid, had questioned her wisdom in pursuing this goal. It was maddening. The worst was Corvin. It seemed as though he had a personal mission to undermine Tawara and stop her from becoming accolade, if it were possible. She would accomplish the goal if for no other reason than to shove it in Corvin's smug, arrogant face. No, Athandra said, letting out a little sigh. That's not what I meant. Of course it is a goal you have set for yourself. What I meant was, I wanted to ask where you got this idea from. Why have you decided to pursue such a dangerous course? You obviously know the risks, so what makes it so important to you?" Tuara watched the other woman for a moment. She seemed sincere, with no hint of malice or ulterior motive in the question. "Well," Tuara said, standing and turning to the window. She did not know how much to share with her Woodard tutor, but she did want someone to understand at least a portion of her desires. "If my mother was still alive, she would be training me. She once had the goal of becoming accolade. After my birth and election, she wanted that for me. Even with the danger, she wanted me to pick up where she had left off." Tuara turned to face Athandra. "She wanted me to go against the grain, to push back and make my own way. She wanted her daughter to be the first accolade in nearly 1,000 years. I will not let my mother's dreams die. It is my destiny." Athandra was silent for a moment, her expression that of someone considering how to unlock an intricate blacksmith's puzzle. She nodded slowly before speaking, her voice strong and authoritative. "Your mother was right. You must go against the grain and continue to be a bit rebellious if you are to become accolade." She straightened her back and squared her shoulders. Though Tuara was taller, she felt as though Athandra were looking down at her, like a child being taught by a wise instructor. "You are not ready. Not yet, anyway. We have less than 2 years to prepare you. You must be more confident, so much so that no one will question you. You must also be competent. If you cannot back up your words with ability, then you will fail, and we both may die." "We?" Tuara asked. "Of course," Athandra replied. "I must prepare you, and I must rise with you or fall with you. If you fail, what do you think will become of me? If you are to see this through, I must change the trajectory of our study. But I will only do so if you are willing to put everything you have into succeeding. Anything less will see us both fall." Tuara bit her lip, watching the shorter woman. A fire burned in the Wooder's eyes, and Tuara couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement in her stomach. She forced herself not to smile. "Well, I do have issues with being confident, and I suppose there are areas where my competence is lacking." Athandra grinned and resumed her relaxed posture, leaning back against the tiger maple desk. "In that case, I believe it is time for the part of today's lessons that does not come from a book. Among the Wood Elves there is a deep division. Those who accept the position below the High Elves and support the rules and laws of the land laid down by the court of the realm, and those who oppose these things and see them as an unjust oppression of our people." "A split among the Wooders? Wood Elves?" Tuara asked in surprise. "Some of your people see our rule as oppressive. Are you among them?" Such a thing had never come into her realm of thinking. "It is more complicated than simply feeling oppressed, but yes," Athandra began explaining. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "You see, my family is well thought of by the ruling court of your people. That's partially why I was chosen to be your handmaid. I hold no malice toward your people, but I have come to see many faults inherent in the system. The court turns a blind eye to anything they do not wish to see. They allow my people to be oppressed and exploited by the local lords. Look the other way when crops fail and my people go hungry and demand ever-growing taxes from us. As a good example, take this divide among the Wood Elves. It causes unrest among them, resulting in skirmishes between the two sides. People die over it. Crops are destroyed, causing hunger. Even families are torn apart over it. Yet the taxes still come in full and on time. So the court refuses to see it as anything more than a small internal issue, unworthy of their time and attention." Tuara listened to the charges being listed against her people. Disbelief and anger grew in her as she took a step forward, bumping into the desk, and nearly knocking over the jar of ink in the process. With hands on hips, she glared down at Athandra. "How can you say such things?" Tuara asked, her cheeks flushed, betraying her inward feelings on the matter. "The High Court rules justly over all its lands and subjects. If the court chooses not to intervene in the division with the Wood Elves, I am sure they have good reason. Surely they do not simply let your people starve and die. Do you think so little of us? Do you think I would do such a thing?" "No, of course not," Athandra replied in a calm, soothing, almost soothing tone. "I am simply saying that the High Court sees things as they want to see them, and not always as they truly are. The Wood Elves are able to pay their taxes, therefore the High Court sees only that. Despite quarreling amongst each other, things must not be bad enough to give it a deeper consideration. Look at the division between the eastern and western provinces in Kuvia. The eastern provinces are attempting to undermine the very authority of the High Elf Court and change the manner of succession. Yet the High Court does nothing to repair the division, instead turning a blind eye, even when members of high families are assassinated in the process. Athandra winced at her last comment, regret painting her face. Tuara felt a stab of pain. It had been only 6 days since the thwarted assassination that took Duchesne's life, and her emotions were still a bit raw. She struggled to not let it show. Since that night, her perception of Athandra had begun to change. Athandra did more than simply give up some sleep on Tuara's behalf. It was the first time since she was a child, being comforted by her mother, that anyone had held her the way Athandra had. There was no judgment or mocking, no shame for the tears she had shed. She hadn't felt the need to cry again since then, and slept more soundly the following 2 nights, knowing Athandra was in the next room over from hers. She spoke as though the comment had not stung. Athandra was not trying to hurt her feelings, after all. She was simply trying to teach. I see what you mean, Tuara said after a few calming breaths. That would seem reasonable to the court, I suppose. Taxes are the main way of determining the state of affairs among their subjects, after all. How else would they know if a certain group of people are struggling? If taxes can be paid, and things like grain shipments to the royal granary are met, there must be a stable enough situation for the wood elves to grow enough crops and maintain industry for them to pay their taxes. Surely your people would not go without necessity just to meet their obligation to the court. With regards to Kuvia, I am not sure why the High Court does not address the division in the realm. Surely they can see the impact it is having on the people and the distress within the houses. She paused briefly before she spoke again, this time more slowly. Perhaps because the threat is against those houses with a princess, and they are so few that the High Court finds it easy to ignore the issue. As Tuara finished her explanation, a knock came at the door, followed by Perry's peeking in before entering. Her hands shook as she dry-washed them nervously. On her left cheek a bruise was just beginning to purple. Princess Tuara, Mistress Tessera demands that you report to her in your bedchamber immediately, Perry's all but stuttered. She's found your books, the ones you shouldn't be reading. I warned you, trouble will come of having them, I said. I was making your bed when Tessera came in looking for you. Just walk right in, no knocking, nothing. She saw them in their hiding spot at the foot of the bed. She did. She's absolutely livid, my lady. You best hurry. Tuara's eyes widened as the woman's words sank in. She felt the blood drain from her face. Oh no, what should how can I explain? Oh no, she stammered. Try to calm yourself, Tuara. You've faced greater challenges than a berating by Tessera, Athandra instructed with calm confidence. Athandra did not understand. Tessera had found her mother's books. Had she found the journal? Would Tessera take them away from her? Athandra knew nothing about the secrets her mother had left to Tuara to discover. The books were her only guide to uncovering what her mother had kept hidden, even from her father. She smoothed her skirts, took a deep breath, and turned for the study door. She took a few short steps and hesitated. Her slender fingers gripped her skirts as if holding to a ledge for dear life, knuckles whitening with the strain. She felt perspiration begin to bead on her forehead. She was terrified. Her feet seemed cemented to the floor as fear overwhelmed her. Athandra stepped closer and placed a reassuring hand on Tuara's shoulder. Remember, hold to calmness, she said in soothing tones. Nothing good will come from rushing in a fluster. You need to be confident and collected when she confronts you. Now go before any delay adds to her temper. Athandra's cool confidence eased Tuara. She didn't know how she would explain things or prevent Tessera from eliminating the only source of clues she had. Yet her fingers loosened on her skirts, and slowly she released them. The silk fell softly at her side. After another moment or two, she remembered to breathe, inhaling deeply before releasing it long enough to sigh. She produced a white, heavily laced handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed the sweat from her brow. With an effort, she slowly advanced one slippered foot in front of the other and made her way to the door. Halfway there, her back straightened. She could at least hold the appearance of confidence, and within a moment she had crossed the room. She had one last moment of hesitation before she took the knob in hand, turned it, pulled the door open, and made her way into the corridor. She kept her pace calm and intentional as she went. Tuara could hear Perry speaking to Athandra behind her as she left the room. She's in for it this time, I fear. Sarah don't give way when it comes to rules and such. Twar's in for it good, I'm afraid. Got me good for it, and they ain't even my books. Couldn't have read them if they was. For a brief moment, Tawara felt pity for the woman. She really had warned Tawara that this was going to happen, and now she'd been punished for Tawara's choices. Well, that seemed to be the theme of her life these days. The long green runner of the hall remained the focus of Tawara's mind as she made her way from her study to her rooms a few dozen paces away. As she came to the tall, heavy banded door, she found it ajar. The antechamber was empty. The door to her bedchamber stood open as well. Through the doorway she could see Tessera pacing before a stack of books haphazardly stacked on her nightstand. The older woman wore a look blending disgust and anger. Not a pleasant picture to look upon, had not herself been the even if Tawara had not herself been the cause of it. There you are. Come here, child, Tessera directed, pointing to a spot a pace in front of her. Now, Tawara, she snapped, when Tawara hesitated. Tawara obeyed and crossed the ornate marble floor to stand before Tessera. The sun had begun to peek through the heavy clouds and flooded the chamber. It silhouetted Tessera against the tall stained glass window. She stood, hands on hips, a disturbing expression of disgust and outrage still on her face. She had come to a stop between Tawara and the books, which kept her from seeing them. What is all this about, Tessera? You called me out of my morning lessons. There had better be a good reason for wasting Athandra's valuable teaching time, for wasting my time as well. You know my father is displeased with how behind my learning is, concerning the matters of the outside realms, no thanks to your tutelage before Athandra arrived. The cheeks of the house matriarch flushed with indignation, and anger flashed through her pale eyes. As she stepped aside, her hand whipped like lightning to the stack of books. This is what this is all about, Tawara Umari. These books are forbidden. You know they are forbidden, or you would not have had them hidden away. Where did you get them? Why do you have them? How did you even learn of them? She gave Tawara less than a heartbeat to respond. Answer me, young lady. Her words echoed through the bedchamber, leaving an eerie silence in their absence. Tawara shrank back a few steps. As hard as she had tried, she had not been able to conjure a reasonable explanation. Her last hope was that confidence alone might save her mother's books. They belong to me, Tessera, Athandra announced as she entered the room. Her soft slippers on the ornate rug had given no warning of her entrance. You brought these writings of heresy into this house? Tessera demanded, her razor-edged gaze shifting to Athandra. Athandra's tone was calm as she approached the books, straightening them into a neat stack. I brought them here to teach, she replied. They are all books on subjects I found lacking in Tawara's studies. I was charged with teaching her in aspects of all the realms of Duradim. Given her station as princess-elect and upcoming appointment to the high court, I felt these books, though possibly inappropriate for the average reader, would be good in expanding her understanding of the other realms. These books are not simply inappropriate, Athandra, Tessera countered. They are forbidden. They teach heresy and ideas that go against the natural order of things. This is not the house of a woods dweller or a pig farmer who follows fantasies. This house is not filled with those who would listen to the voices of treason. I might expect such things to come from to be common literature among the lower classes, perhaps even among the more well-bred wood elves, but such forbidden literature has no place in House Umari or in the education of young ladies of esteem. Tessera let out a heavy sigh, brought her hand to her forehead, and closed her eyes as she continued. I will not take them, even though I should have them taken and destroyed. She dropped her hand to her side, and Tawara could read the frustration in her face. I will overlook this and see it as a good intention of a misguided tutor. However, she stated firmly as she brought a finger up to shake it in front of Athandra, I expect them to be gone by dinner time tonight. Return them to where you got them, sell them, or burn them. How you get rid of them I do not care, but I expect them to be gone. Do I make myself clear? Tessera's disdain for the books and her desire to have them out of the house was almost tangible. She looked over the now neat stack, shaking her head. I apologize for the distress they have caused you, Mistress Tessera. I will see that they are taken care of, Athandra replied sincerely. Tessera gave the books one last look of disgust before turning her attention to Tawara. She let out a heavy sigh before speaking. Tawara, I came to inform you that Premier Corvin has returned. He wishes you to dine with him this evening, and he has requested your presence as well, Athandra. There are matters he wishes to discuss with you. Considering this little issue this morning, she gestured toward the books as she gave first Tawara, then Athandra a look of warning. I expect I do not need to tell you to be on your best behavior. Her purpose fulfilled and the issue with the book sufficiently dealt with, Tessera took one more look about the room to make sure everything else seemed in order. With a nod to Tawara, she took her leave. As the latch of the heavy door clicked shut, bubbles of giggling began to fill the room. Tawara, in shock, looked at Athandra, who had her hand over her mouth, trying in vain to muffle the laughter. What in the name of the gods? Tawara began when a soft knock came at the back of the servants' door. Come in, Paris. Tessera is gone, she called to the back of the room. Her attention remained on Athandra. Paris, now in tears, slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Her gaze turned to the floor. She made her way into the room to address Tawara. My humblest apologies, my lady. I know you must be in some state of trouble now. It were all my fault. I was making a bed when she came in, just like I said. I didn't have no time to cover up your books. She saw them and straight away started to tongue-lashing me good, asking me what I was doing with what they was doing there hidden in the bed. I didn't know I says to her, she got me good for that. She rubbed the large purple bruise on her cheek. Then I tells her, I just know you had them books there that you liked to read when you wasn't studying. Told her I don't know a thing about what's in them. She said she should turn me out in the street for not telling her you was hiding the things away. Please don't be mad at me, my lady. I did try to make it sound as if you was innocent as I could, what with them books already out and found. Tawara walked to Paris and took her by the shoulders, requiring her to reach a bit to do so. Even as a human, Paris was a good half-hand taller than she. It is all right, Paris. Tessera has calmed down. Thanks to Athandra, neither of us has anything more to worry about. I know it wasn't your fault, she said in soothing tones. I will have to have a talk with Tessera in a bit, once all this blows over, about the propriety of just entering the chambers of a royal without due warning. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Most of your duties are done for the day anyway. And don't you worry about being turned out of the house. Tessera may be the governess of the house, but you are my chambermaid, not hers. Oh, thank you, my lady, Paris replied, her eyes now free of tears. Thank you, right kind you are, right kind indeed. I will be here all the earlier in the morning, my lady, to make up for any tidying that don't get done today. Very well, Paris. Have a good day, and do not worry any more about Tessera, Tawara said, dismissing her servant with a warm smile. Once the door shut behind Paris, Tawara turned back to Athandra, only to find her once again stifling laughter, her cheeks turning red with mirth. What is so funny, Athandra? That was serious. If Tessera had decided to tell Corvin about those books, I don't know what might have happened. And you taking responsibility for them? Do you have any idea what is in those books? Tawara chastised, pointing to the neat stack on the side table. Poor Paris. I felt bad for her. She had no idea what she was in for when Tessera found those, Athandra mused, completely ignoring Tawara's haughty chastisement, before bursting out in laughter again. Did you see the look on her face? I thought she would burst a vein. She was so mad. Athandra, this is serious. Tawara chastised her again, before taking a moment to collect herself. If she were to tell Corvin you had brought such writings into the house, you would be sent away for sure. You would likely be strapped in the process before being sent on your way. That aside, she continued, her tone shifting from scorn to gratitude, I am grateful to you for taking the blame. Tessera would not have let the matter go so easily if she knew they were truly mine. Athandra did her best to put on a straight face. It appeared to take considerable effort. Picking up a book, she studied its cover for a moment, running her fingers over the gold-embossed title. Devlar's Quest, she read as she opened the novel and flipped through the pages. It is a fantasy, Tawara explained, about a drow and a high elf and the forbidden love between them. It has a grand adventure and heroic battles and a wonderful love story. This was one of her favorite books, and she let her fondness show. Her chastising manner faded completely away as she continued. A relationship forbidden by the high elves. I do not know why such a simple story of romance is forbidden. It is not as though things like this really happen. It is just a story. Stories such as this are more important than simple entertainment, Athondra explained as she closed the book. They are ideas. Ideas of things that some people, such as the High Court, don't want others to think about. Ideas sometimes turn into actions, and that would never be acceptable. Tora crossed a few paces between them, to stand next to Athondra, taking the book from her. She thumbed through the pages until she found one that was folded over, opening the book to that page. This is my favorite part, the duel between Devlar and Tetrilla's brother. Devlar's Quest is a good book, Athondra commented as she ran her fingers along the spine of each of the volumes on the table. One of my favorites. The second book, Devlar's Journey, is much better in my opinion. It goes a little farther into forbidden territory, no doubt surpassing your favorite part in that one. Tora was shocked that that her Wooder companion would have access to these types of books, much less be interested to read them. You have read these? Where? I did not know there was a second book. Better than this one, you say? Wait, I did not know these stories would interest someone such as yourself. You have lived outside, in the world. Surely you have experienced enough in life that simple books such as this must seem droll. My life outside this house and realm has not been that exciting, Thunder replied, somewhat sarcastically. I find just as much enjoyment in letting my imagination run with the stories as anyone. There are 4 books in the series in all. Devlar's Journey is my personal favorite, though. The author, Tav Gorham, has written many of these books. She gestured to the stack. Some works of fiction, others that are more historically accurate. Some of these even tell of real events that happened over the centuries in several of the realms. Events that your people would rather not be common knowledge. That is why they are banned. A few of these I had actually planned to bring and teach out of when the time was right. Tora shuffled through the stack, skimming through the titles. I still can't believe you have read all of these. Where did you get your hands on them? My mother has a small personal library, Athondra answered, taking a seat on the bed. She sank into the fluffy down of the comforter and mattress. My father discourages it, but my mother is a strong-willed woman. If she wants a library filled with inappropriate books, I don't think he could stop her if he tried. I won't get rid of them. I probably should, but I truly thought of bringing a few of these in to supplement the other volumes of your studies. I will take them to my chambers and bring them to you one at a time. You should be able to keep just one from Tessera's eyes, I trust. We will just keep that part of our tutoring more discreet. Tora sat on the bed beside Athondra, newly found respect and curiosity for her handmaid working its way through her mind. Perhaps having a Wooder as a handmaid and teacher would be a better situation than she could have imagined. She flipped a few pages further into Devlar's Quest, pointing to a note scribbled in the margin. This is a note my mother made. These were her books. She loved to read and had her own rebellious streak, that whole becoming an accolade. I discovered them recently and kept them hidden away in my own secret library. She looked at Athondra, feeling a nearly overwhelming desire to confide everything in the other woman. The clues her mother had left behind, the secrets she had alluded to in her journal, the hidden mystery about her own past, whose answer lay somewhere in Samunas. Instead, she pushed the feeling back down. She wasn't ready to so fully open herself to Athondra. Not yet. Your mother has her own library, Tuara asked. I did not realize such things were of interest to woodland elves. Yes, she does, Athondra replied. There are a few hundred books in it, of which she has read them all. I myself have read nearly all of them. Even we Wooders can appreciate the value of a good education. I did not mean... What I meant to say was, Tuara said, fumbling for words. I know what you meant, Tuara said as she picked up a large green book with a wooden binding from the stack and turned to a page about halfway through the monstrous volume. What does this passage tell you? And that is all of chapter 20.
All right.
So, the tides are turning. Or something like that.
Barriers are coming down.
Barriers are falling. There we go. That's a good way to put it. Oh. So this chapter, we really bounced around a lot in writing this chapter. And it was one of those ones that it moved me all over the place.
Yeah, but it didn't change much.
It didn't. It didn't change a lot. There were some details we added in, and then one of the things we had added in Tawara's desire to be an accolade. And in this chapter, initially we wrote it and it didn't have any of that in there. The main focus was on the books. And then we needed to get out, like we had that earlier chapter from Athandra's perspective, where she had been told by Corvin to dissuade her from being an accolade. And then Athandra was like, kind of came to the decision a couple chapters ago about, well, maybe I should help her become an accolade. So we needed to kind of bring that together to have Athandra directly approach Tawara about it, directly talk to her about, hey, if you're serious about this, you're going about it all wrong. You've got to, if you're going to be serious about it, you got to be serious about it. So, yeah, it bounced around a lot, but some of those little details were added in, but it hasn't significantly changed
No, it's
from early on.
it's one of the few chapters that we did make changes to that didn't really affect its overall structure, what the content.
Yeah. And the theme still, as we talked about it, we talked back and forth about what specifically was in that chapter and said, well, this theme still applies. She's trying to become an accolade. To be an accolade, you have to be rebellious. To be rebellious, you have to have access to rebellious information that is banned or diving into it would be seen as rebellious. So we got to have something.
Yeah.
And we had already, it was more just a point of interest for Tawara initially. It was more just she had a rebellious streak and she was reading things she wasn't supposed to read. So changing things around, it still goes well with the overall trajectory, but now it adds that additional element of what are these things she's learning and studying and figuring out or investigating that she's not really supposed to be investigating, and how are they going to come up?
Yeah, it also opens the door, I think, for Athandra to move in closer to her.
Yeah.
Both.
That may was that I think that might have been initially why we put that in there to begin with.
The whole chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The books were in there and everything was we needed a connection between Athandra and Tawara.
Right.
Hence the name of the chapter, A New Confidant. Where we're like, they're going to start out with butting heads, especially from Tawara's perspective. And we need them to start making a connection, and we need it to happen early. So between people around her getting murdered and needing a shoulder to cry on, and conveniently there's this person here upon whose shoulder is available to cry on. Nobody else in the house seems to have any kind of sympathy or empathy for her situation. And now we add this other element of, wait a minute, you're a rebel too? We're both rebel scum. So it kind of covered a lot of different aspects there that we wanted to bring in, and stuff that is in this chapter right now, even though at the moment you're like, well, it's just them talking about becoming an accolade and studying in these books. We're writing stuff in book 2 right now. And have been editing and revising stuff in book 2 that's a direct result of this chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, so we're not going to give anything away. But there is a lot. There's a lot there, which made me think about a question that had been asked about world building. And one of the questions is that was asked is like, how deep should you go when you're doing your world building? How deep, how many layers deep do things need to go?
Yeah, and that when you're considering that, you have to consider what's my audience
Yeah.
first, but then from there, once you decide, okay, this is the kind of story that hopefully the audience is going to be interested in,
Yeah.
a deep world build.
Yeah.
And from there, it's the psychosis of the writers as to how far you go.
Yeah. And talking about book 2 and book 3, like uh, there's some writer groups that I follow, and one of them was, what's something that you accomplished in the last few days that you feel good about? And so I threw out there that, I didn't want to get into specific details and, throw any spoilers out there, but that Jared and I we have been mulling over some stuff for books 2 and 3, like extensively,
Mm-hmm.
the past, what, 6 weeks, maybe?
Yeah, something like that, at least.
I mean, we've been really churning over some stuff that's very uh, world centric, but also heavily impacts the plot. Very heavily determines direction of the plot and all kinds of things. Where we're like, wait a minute, if we go this direction, giant gaping plot hole that we now have to close. But if we go this direction, here's another big plot hole, and we got to shift things that way. And what I put out there was that I felt really good about is this weekend, just in the past few days, we've been talking and hammering things out. And there's a doorway in Jared's house, in his kitchen, that I'll stand up and pace when I'm trying to think about things, and frequently I'll be like, man, I need a whiteboard. I need to, you know, uh, I've said like writing our book is like, you see those conspiracy theory boards that people have all the tack pins with all the strings and stuff going everywhere. And I'm like, that's what I feel like. Like, this connects to this and this connects to this. So I'm pacing back and forth, and he has going from his kitchen into the living room, dining room into the living room. It's like a 6 foot wide opening with an arch. And I'm like, Jared, do you have masking tape? He's like, yep, in that drawer right there. So I pull out the masking tape, and I'm like, all the way over the arch. And I'm like, all right, here's the story arc of our plot. And then we start marking timelines across using the masking tape so we don't write on his wall because I don't have a whiteboard. We start writing it out like, okay, this has to happen here. Now this, now this, now this, now this. And if we're putting these new details in or change, like, are there any chapters or any pieces of plot that need to shift around? And so we get this arch of an actual story arc.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. And then we're like, okay, we feel really good about that. But now there's some key elements some key details that we have to understand before we finish writing and editing book 2. And so this past weekend, we talked and talked and talked and talked, and what did we say? It was like a 4 or 5 hour brainstorming session.
Yeah, it was. Are you counting the drive?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that alone was 2 hours plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The drive back, we drove up to north of town and drove around and stuff. But yeah, the whole cumulative time, we're like, this was like 5 hour brainstorming session. And that was like all of these things over several weeks kind of culminated in, boom, we're like, walked away, like, we got it. We've got this stuff figured out. And then, so over the weekend, a little bit more, we fleshed out a few more ideas. Now we're like, now we know where these key pieces of plot are going to go. The reason that's all pertinent to this question of if you create a world, how deep should your plot go? Is because the questions we had to ask ourselves were, okay, well, they're going to go do this. They're going to go on this adventure and they're going to, you know, accomplish X, Y, and Z. And these barriers come up that keep them, that are going to try to challenge them and attempt to keep them from accomplishing X, Y, and Z. But the things that come up and with what they're, the quest that they're going on, it ties into how book 14 is going to end.
Yeah.
And that ties into the prequels 15,000 years ahead of time. How did all this come to fruition to begin with?
Yeah, it was very productive. I mean,
Yeah.
we hashed out how things were going to go and
Yeah.
what's going to have to happen in the end and how that affects where we are in the beginning.
Yeah.
And
Because, we kept saying, well, we cannot write ourselves into a corner. We have to know. We've known for a while, well, how is it all going to wrap up? We already know. We already have some of those scenes. But then when we get into the specifics of the rules that exist in the world that we're creating.
yeah, because one of the things we're really trying to do is not have because magic.
Yeah. And we've talked about it before, not have the feeling of, everything is crumbling and there's no way they can win except even though I'm stabbed and bleeding and on the verge of death, gaping chest wound. Well, I can just be like, no, I will win because I must, and therefore I shall. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. We don't want stuff like that. And so to not have stuff like that, we have to know the detail. And so that's really what we were hashing through is from a world building perspective, we had to start going really, really deep into what is the history? How did things end up where they are now? What was the specific reason that caused it? Which we I guess not the reason. We knew the reason. We know the
Right.
reason it's there. But we had to come up with
The mechanism.
yeah, what is the specific mechanism that allowed all this to happen then? And when you get to the end of the book, the whole end of the whole series, how do they reverse or how do they change or deal with all those mechanisms? But then also, well, why didn't they do that over the past 12,000 years? Why didn't they just do that then? Well, they couldn't, because of this and this and this. Well, why did that scenario exist? Well, that scenario existed because 15,000 years ago, the people then did X, Y, and Z. So now you have this ripple effect through time all the way to the end of the story. And now Tuara and Athandra, bloop, are in the middle of this ripple
Yeah.
that spans 15,000 years. And all the details have to fit.
And I'm sure there will be more of these,
Yeah.
butterfly effects that we come across as we go, because we still got a lot to write.
Yeah.
But, each time you're able to go back and say, okay, this is this because of that back there caused this at the end.
Yeah.
And how do we deal with it here in the middle? I'm sure there'll be a lot more of those.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure things like that are going to come up.
Well,
But-
even just a few days ago, we had another part that was part of this smaller quest that they're going on right where we're at now in the books. And we still had to go a few thousand years in the past
Yeah.
to come up with reasoning for what they're doing now and why
Yeah.
it works or doesn't work.
Yeah, we're like, well, wait a minute. If they just solve this problem that they're facing, they read this book and then they go do X, Y, and Z, and then they solve the problem. We're like, well, somebody wrote that book, and the problem would have existed then. Why didn't they just go do it? And I'm like, either everyone for thousands of years have had no ambition to do anything and be incredibly lazy, or there has to be a reason, and that reason has to fit within the laws that govern our world. So we came up with, well, here's the sequence. Here's why. Here's why it happened back then. Here's why it couldn't be resolved now. And here's what they learn and discover that literally nobody else would have been able to discover. And there's a specific reason why, and it specifically applies to these two characters. It's not, they're not the chosen ones, but they are, like, the specific scenario that they find themselves in is the only reason why now at this point in time they're able to solve the problem. And it's not just, well, because magic. It's because, if anybody had tried it beforehand, before this time, even if they had the knowledge that Tuar and Thonder will have, they would not have had the ability to accomplish what Tuar and Thonder accomplish. It's specific to them. They're in this place, and they learn what they need to learn, and they have the abilities. I guess it is kind of a chosen one scenario, but not
but not like,
it's not directly.
right.
It's not a direct.
It's not a King Arthur.
No. Low Lady of the Lake came out and chucks, watery tarts, chucking scimitars at people to make them the chosen ones. But all of that really tends to, we've had to go really deep into our world. We've had to go really deep into the history, to the lore, to the governance of the different realms. So if you create a world, I think the question of how deep should you go in your lore really depends on how intricate is the world that you're building. How intricate is the plot to the world that you're creating. Look at, we've talked plenty of times about Brandon Sanderson books and Wheel of Time, Robert Jordan, George R. R. Martin, Stephen Erickson. These books go really in depth in world building stuff. But all of the world stuff is pertinent to the characters. Well, let me rephrase that a little bit. Most of the world building stuff is pertinent to characters being able to accomplish what they can accomplish. If you just say, and they cross the mountains. Okay, you can do that. You can say, well, they crossed the mountains. Unless those mountains were formed, by the giant worms with stone carapace that used to live in these lands, and the worms pushed up the rock and formed the mountains. They weren't naturally formed, and because they weren't naturally formed and they were created by these carapace covered worms, the little, what would be small little mites that lived in the carapace of the worms, when the worms died, the mites still live there, and they're what people call trolls that live in these mountains. They're not actually trolls. They're, the parasites that lived under the carapace of these giant worms that ended up, just like if you get lice or something, there's thousands of them. They're all over the place, and they just breed and form. Like, that's what people call trolls. So when you cross the mountains, you got to go through these big worm tunnels and fight off the trolls that are the worm lice.
Yeah, and you got to ask, which would someone rather read? They crossed the mountains, or they had to go into the wormholes and fight the trolls?
Yeah.
You know,
And
is it pertinent to your story?
or to character development,
Yeah.
one of the two. Is there something that happens that will come up that will be important? And it should. There should be something important, some reason
Right.
why those things exist there. But it still makes it more interesting to read about, well, how long have these mountains been here? About 100,000 years. Well, where are the worms? They've been gone about 50,000 years. But the little lice trolls, the worm lice, are still living there. And they kill everybody that goes through there. Or something. Maybe they don't kill them. Maybe they force them to, they have to dress up with coconuts and grass skirts and they force them to dance for them. I don't know. Any number of things that can happen, but it depends on how deep you want to go in your world. One of the things that made me think of this is Jared and I work with my sister at the farmer's market, and it's fall. So one of the things we sell, and I say one, something we sell at the farmer's market in the fall is the varieties of pumpkin and squash. How many varieties of pumpkin, which I guess pumpkin is just a variety of squash. Pumpkins are squash. How many varieties of squash exist in your world? Because just at the farmer's market, what did Melissa say? She has 51 varieties?
I think so, yeah.
I'm like, what? And that's not even close to how many varieties of squash, winter squash, there are. That's just 51 varieties that we sell every Saturday at the farmer's market. And they're all different sizes, all different colors, all different shapes. There's flat ones, round ones, long, skinny ones. There's red, green, blue colored, striped in green and red, striped in green and blue, yellow that are like a dull yellow, bright yellow. Some of them are fuzzy, some of them are slick.
Some of them have bumps, some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's warty looking ones that look like, a witch cast a spell on it and made it be all warty and goblin-y. So many different colors and varieties and shapes and flavors and textures. You can eat all of them. So just looking at that, how many varieties of pumpkins or squash, how many varieties of squash exist in your world? If you're creating a world and writing about it, do you know how many varieties of squash exist in your world?
And depending on your story, how many varieties of squash do you need?
Yeah. Maybe there's a million varieties of squash. You only ever bring up 2. Or maybe there's a million variety of squash and you're going to put in different references to the different varieties of squash in your world building companion manual. And you never mention squash in your story ever. There's all different ways that people write and people tell stories. But I've seen that question come up a couple different times in writer groups of, well, I don't know how deep I should go. Am I going too deep? Am I not going deep enough? Well,
you need to go deep enough to explain your story, fill plot holes, and develop characters. Beyond that, it's at the whim of the writer, really.
Yeah.
And the writer's ability to judge his audience.
Yeah. And your ability to make it interesting. One of the questions that was asked that popped up the other day in a writer's group was, as a reader, do you enjoy reading nonfiction? Because a lot of the writers that I see are all fiction writers. And the question was asked, well, do you enjoy reading nonfiction? And I'm like, well, I like reading anything as long as it's written well. I have read stories in textbooks, history textbooks, where I'm like, I read through pages and then I'm like, I don't remember a scene. My brain did not take any of this in. It was just so and so went here, and in 1843 they went here, and then in 1851 this happened, and then blah blah, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how boring can you get? Blah.
Yeah.
But I like um, the Big Oyster, which is about New York. We call New York the Big Apple when one of the first major exports from New York, from the harbor there, was oysters. And it was a unique oyster that was only found in that harbor. And some of those oysters, they said, were like a foot long, giant oysters. And they were very well known and I'm like, I didn't know anything about that. And you think, well, how can you write an entire book about oysters that, specifically in New York and the harvesting industry and what happened to the oysters in New York? But somebody wrote a book about it, and they did a dang good job of making it interesting. And it's about oysters in New York. It's called The Big Oyster. Or there's another one that I think I mentioned it before, A Taste for War, and it's the culinary practices of the Civil War, comparison of North and South, and what soldiers came up with to eat, and how like an army marches on its stomach. I'm like, hey, they did a good job of writing that, making it interesting. One of my books that two books that I really like is two autobiographies. Wait, which is a biography or autobiography?
Oh, autobiography is written by the author,
It's
or
written.
the
Okay,
author is the.
so biographies, not autobiography. No, no. So Sir Walter Raleigh and Peter the Great. Those are two biographies. I'm like, they were great reads. I really enjoyed reading them. Tons of facts, tons of information and dates and times and everything like that. But they read like someone's like, let me tell you a tale about Peter the Great, and it's kind of how it's written. And um, but they're both very well written and enjoyable. And most historical books like that have a lot of world building stuff. Well, I say world building, they go deep. They go deep into historical fact because they have to support everything that they're telling. Plus, like I said, how do you write an entire book about oysters in New York? Well, you do if you're really good at world building and going deep enough to tell the story of oysters in the world of New York. And then telling that story in a way that I was like, I really enjoyed reading that book. In fact, I'll probably go back and read it again sometime just because, I don't remember everything. It's been several years since I read it, but it was a really enjoyable book. I'm going to go back and read it again sometime. So when you're thinking about world building, you're thinking about the stories you're writing and how deep you should go. Well, depends. Really depends what you're writing, and you got to ask yourself, how deep in the world should I go and can I go to tell the story of oysters or pumpkins or Sir Walter Raleigh and Peter the Great? How much world building is required to tell those stories? And then keep it interesting. How interesting can you, and maybe you're going to do a book that is focused purely on world building. The big question is, how interesting can you make it? If you can make it interesting enough, you can have a whole book that's all just world building. And then you get to the end, you're like, wait a minute, were there even any characters in this book? All it was like world building stories. Like, yeah, but it sucked me in. And I just couldn't let go and I couldn't put it down. So I think those are the elements you got to take into consideration of how interesting can you make your world building, how pertinent to what you're doing, Can you make it apply? And then how well can you write about it? Could you write a book about oysters? Not all oysters, just oysters in New York. And not oysters throughout all the history of New York. Just the oysters in New York up until about between like discovery and the Industrial Revolution. Only that time period and only those oysters. Can you do that? Make it interesting? If you can, you're probably a pretty talented writer. So, I don't know. Any thoughts? Last thoughts there on world building, Jared, or oysters?
Well, not on oysters. For world building, a lot of it is very important just to, like we've talked about, you've got to explain your world, how it works, why it works, develop characters, move plot along. But from a selfish point of view, as an author, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably the most fun part of writing is building the world, building the characters. And
yeah.
So have fun with it. If you're going to do it, have fun with it.
Yeah, I've heard, like, if you're not having fun, don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Because,
yeah, a football coach of mine, as you go through school, there's attrition in teams. Yeah. You lose people. And he said one of the best pieces of advice he ever gave us was, if you're doing something for fun and it's not fun anymore, stop doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, don't be like, I'm not having fun at my job anymore. I quit.
Yeah. Because you're not just doing that for fun.
Yeah.
And as an author, it's not all fun.
Yeah.
But overall, we're still doing it for fun.
Yeah.
And so have fun with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was fun coming, even though it was work and it was, we kept looking at each other going, oh, this is so much. There's so much here. And then when I talked to Melissa, and we talked through some of the stuff that we'd come up with, she was like, that's so much. That's just so much stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but we have to go through all the stuff in order to make it work for our world. So it's got to be more.
Yep.
So, yeah, go the depth that you need to go and that you want to go and have fun with it. And to steal a phrase, the world is your oyster. It definitely is in the Big Oyster. Alrighty. Well, I think that's all we have for today. So no matter what you're doing, go out, do some world building, tell a story, sing a song, make some art, do something creative, and build the world that you want to build. And have fun with it. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you following along. Till next time, go in good spirits. Thanks for listening to the Creators Guild podcast. Don't forget to get your copy of A Flight from Shadows, available on Amazon. While you're there, please rate it and give it a review. If you like the Creators Guild, please like and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends. Until next time, go in good spirits.